Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to review the Laowa 7.5mm f2 lens from Venus Optics. It's one of the widest zero distortion lenses that you get for micro four thirds. Now micro four thirds can mean GH5, Olympus, as well as the DJI Inspire drone, which takes a micro four thirds lens. Now the Laowa 7.5mm lens does come in two options. It comes in a heavier option and a lighter option. Now the heavier option is the go-to one for the GH5. We are talking a little bit of grams here which you don't feel, but the reason that I would suggest you go for the heavier option is the lighter option is designed for drones, and the heavier option weighs a little bit closer to the average lens that you're going to put on your GH5 or micro four thirds camera. We're going to be covering a few things in this video, which is price, the build quality, the sharpness of the lens, its field of view, closest focus distance, as well as the f-stop and the bokeh. Now if you're wondering why I'm referring to bokeh and we're actually looking at a really wide lens, and a lot of people don't care about bokeh when you go to a wide lens, it's due to the closest focus distance that this lens has, which is really awesome for products or close-ups of things other than humans. Otherwise they're super distorted. And after this I'm going to be showing you a ton of visual, real-world shots that we've actually taken with the Laowa 7.5mm lens over the last few years. And yes, I've had this lens for a few years and I do not review products unless I've extensively used it, and I love it. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It helps us a ton and it helps us to create more of these videos, and we've got a ton more content coming out. And if you haven't checked out some of our other work after you've watched this and you've subscribed, please go ahead and do so. So the Laowa 7.5mm lens currently comes in at $499. Now the lighter version, which is ideal for drones, is at $20 more, and like I say, not really worth it. Now if you are looking at buying this in South Africa, you can buy it off the Amazon store. I will drop a link below which is from the Venus Optics actual Amazon store that you can purchase it, and the lens is currently going for 7,732 Rand, and the import duties and postages is only 1,482. So you're looking at just over 9,000 Rand for an insanely wide, super sharp lens. So the build quality on the Laowa 7.5 is absolutely amazing. It's made out of solid metal or aluminium, and it really is a tough piece of equipment, and even the focus ring is super smooth, and the f-stop ring has some nice clicks to it. The lens hood is actually aluminium, which is kind of nice to see on a really affordable lens because most of these things are plastic nowadays. However, this is pretty useless and you can't really use it. It doesn't really block out the sun. I don't actually use mine. The lens cap is really tiny, really finicky, but it's got a nice little grip to it if you are going to use it like this without the lens hood. And yeah, also something that I actually don't really use. And the reason for that being is I've actually got a step-up ring for this to use an ND filter. So while we're on the topic of build quality, this is my step-up ring. I actually use a 46 to 67mm, or if you want to call it a step-down ring, which either way you want to measure it, it screws on just like that. Then I have a 67mm variable ND filter. Now if you're wondering why I have such a massive variable ND filter, as you know, ND filters tend to vignette quite a bit, and because this lens is actually so wide, you get a lot of vignetting from it. So by going as wide as you can, you don't really get too much of a vignette, and this measurement you actually get 0. However, you do get a little bit of a cross pattern in the center if you fully crank out your variable ND filter. Why I would actually, now the reason I'd recommend going to this millimeter is due to the size of it. It actually matches the footprint of a GH5 or GH5S to the floor. So what I'm basically saying is if you mounted a base plate for a gimbal or a tripod onto your GH5, it would fit flush with this and it wouldn't actually push past it, so it fits perfectly. Now the field of view on the Laowa 7.5mm lens, because it's on a micro four thirds sensor, it gets a 2x crop factor, meaning it is 15mm. Now currently you are watching this on the GH5S and the Laowa 7.5mm. Now the GH5S isn't exactly a 2x crop factor, it's just under. So instead of being 15mm, it works out to about 14mm just under. So for those of you that have a normal Panasonic lens that you're probably used to, I'm going to swap this Laowa lens out and I'm going to move it over to the standard 12 to 35mm lens and zoom it out to 12 so you can see. So have a look at these points on the further sides that you can see right now, and this next shot you'll be looking through the 12 to 35. So this is at 12mm, so I think this gives you a fair idea on how wide the Laowa actually is. So I'm just going to flick backwards and forwards on a few shots so you can have a look. So due to the compression that you're currently getting on a 12mm lens, you'll see that the background is slightly blurrier than what happens on the Laowa. Now the Laowa was actually filming at f2, but as you know, because the lens is so wide, you don't really get that bokeh. As you can see, you don't really get that bokeh. But if I come up really close and I change the focus distance to 0.2, you can see how insanely close this thing can actually focus, and it can still go closer, and now the background is pretty soft. So looking at the closest focal distance, you can crank this right down to 0.12, which is insanely close. Now if you want to know how close that is, check out this shot. Now I do understand that a lot of people that are going to be using this are actually going to be setting it to infinity focus. Now the focal distance at infinity focus basically puts everything in focus. Now if you're going to be filming with this lens, I would generally suggest to film at f4 to f5.6, as that is the optimal sharpness for this lens. It's not 100% sharp at f2, and in saying that, I think it's just been a little bit fussy. It is sharp at f2, it's just that at 5.6 this thing is untouchable. One of the things I've often read and seen reviews on is that people say that at 0.5 the focal distance that Laowa actually puts on the lens is not accurate. Now to be quite honest, it's pretty darn accurate. If I'm sitting at 0.5 meters away from the camera and I'm filming something like in the main shot that you've seen when the video started, I actually set it just past 0.5 because I'm just over half a meter away from the camera, and I filmed that at f2. So it is pretty darn accurate. This one is accurate. I'm not 100% sure if all others are accurate. However, my father actually films with one of these as well, and his is pretty darn accurate too, and he gets no issues. So if you do have one of these, test it out, put something 0.2 meters away, film it at f2, and then do a test. Now while we're on closest focal distance, let's get into f-stop and bokeh. As you've seen, the focal distance on this lens is actually set with a focus ring over here, which is very smooth. It's not easily movable, so you're not going to bump it and move it. It takes quite a little bit of force. However, the f-stop ring is absolutely amazing. It's got a nice little click to it, and you might actually be able to hear it over the mic. This lens actually goes from f2 on the red line all the way down to f22. Now I wouldn't suggest filming this at f16 or f22 because you're not going to get optimal sharpness out of the lens. The lens is optimized to be filmed at f4 and f5.6. That's where I'd recommend it. However, if you are trying to block out a little bit more light and you don't have an ND filter, you can head over to f8, f11 if you really want to. So talking about the bokeh of this lens, I just want to show you something. If you film this at f2 like I showed you just now, and you get really close to something, and I often do this for certain shots, whether it be food shots or product shots, or I'm just trying to get something really unique and cool, you do get quite a bit of a bokeh in the background. However, you're not going to pull bokeh balls out of this. It's probably just going to be a nice soft buttery background, as you can see over here. Okay, so let's talk sharpness. Now, as I've just mentioned, that this lens is optimized to be shot at f4 and f5.6, and that's where you're going to get your ultimate sharpness. What I'm actually going to do is put up a shot over here of my office setup without me in it, and I'm going to put this at f5.6 on the GH5S. So what I'll do is I'll zoom into the shot from left to right, and you can actually just look at the sharpness of this lens and move over from left to right. Now keep in mind that technically, because the lens is so wide, ideally the GH5 would be slightly sharper on the edges because it's not such a zoomed out crop factor at 1.86. It's a little bit more zoomed in, so it's not going to reach the distortion of the lens that you would actually get from the GH5. So this is on the GH5S, and as you can see, the edges are pretty darn sharp for a 7.5mm lens. So there's an in-depth look at the Laowa 7.5mm f2. Now I'm going to show you a whole bunch of shots that were actually taken on this on various things, whether it be weddings or just events, some B-roll, everything that we've kind of accumulated that can give you an idea on how versatile and cool this lens actually is. A lot of this is filmed on either the GH5 or GH5S. I hope you guys enjoy the cinematic piece, and we'll catch you on the next video. So what I do want to show you is, as a photographer, I shoot with a full frame Nikon camera, and when I shoot wide shots like I would with the 7.5mm, I would go to my 14-24. And this is comparison from full frame to micro four thirds. Now this is a 14-24 2.8. I'll actually put a wider shot in here so you can have a look. And that is how tiny this lens is. And the quality that comes out of this is absolutely superb. And I don't think the average person would actually see the difference. And one of the most mind-blowing factors is looking at that small piece of glass versus that piece of glass.